The Shell of the Sixth Solid. Part 1. The Fractal Whisper. The wind, a raw, keening entity born of the North Atlantic, swept across the barren, lichen-encrusted cliffs of Mistaken Point with the fury of a forgotten god. It was late September on the Newfoundland coast, a time when the gray sky bled seamlessly into the turbulent gray ocean, and the world felt stripped bare to its ancient, stony bones. Dr. Elena Vassiliev, her face chapped and ruddy despite the layers of thermal gear, barely registered the cold. Her focus was a laser, narrowed onto the slab of Ediacaran rock before her. 20 relentless years of fieldwork, from the Siberian traps to the Flinders Ranges, had honed her senses, taught her that patience was a far more reliable companion than warmth, and that the earth only yielded its deepest secrets to those who listened with their fingertips and their souls. Anything. Dr. Marcus Chen, her research assistant for the past 3 years, called out. His voice was partially muffled by the thick collar of his thermal jacket and the ceaseless howl of the wind. He was a good 10 meters away, methodically cataloging samples near their battered Land Rover, his movements betraying a longing for the relative warmth of St. John's. Marcus was a brilliant paleontologist in his own right, grounded and meticulous, but he often found Elena's more esoteric mathematical diversions a source of gentle bemusement. Elena didn't answer immediately. Her gloved fingers, surprisingly deft despite their numbness, danced over the fossil fragment she had just delicately coaxed from the rock face with a fine chisel. It was a sliver, perhaps 5 centimeters long, of what appeared to be a mollusk shell, its color a dull, earthy ochre against the darker gray of the surrounding mudstone. Unremarkable at first glance, the kind of find that would elicit a polite nod at a conference before being filed away. But Elena's gaze, amplified by the magnifying visor she wore, was snagged by something else. An infinitesimally fine pattern etched into its surface. It wasn't just the usual growth lines of a shell. There was a recursive complexity, a depth to the etching that spoke of a biological algorithm far more sophisticated than anything she knew from this primordial period, predating the Cambrian explosion by tens of millions of years. It resonated with an otherness that both thrilled and unsettled her. Perhaps, she finally replied, her voice carrying the distinct cadence of her native Russian, softened but never erased by 2 decades in Canada. Something atypical. We'll know more when we get it back to the lab. She carefully placed the fragment into a cushioned, hermetically sealed sample case, her mind already racing miles ahead, translating the visual data into the elegant language of equations. As a biomathematician specializing in paleontological patterns, Elena had carved a unique, and often controversial, niche for herself. Where other paleontologists saw the preserved remains of ancient life, Elena perceived intricate mathematical structures, algorithms written in calcium carbonate and stone by the grand, blind programmer of evolution. Her doctoral dissertation on fractal patterns in the carapaces of Cambrian trilobites had sent ripples through the field, earning her both the prestigious Sedgwick Prize and a chorus of skeptical detractors who dismissed her work as numerology masquerading as science. She paid them little heed. The patterns were there, undeniable, whispering of a deeper order. Back at Memorial University of Newfoundland, Elena's laboratory was a testament to her dual passions. It occupied a spacious corner suite in the Earth Sciences building, a space she had gradually reshaped into something resembling a cross between a traditional paleontology workshop and a high-tech mathematician's sanctuary. One long wall was lined floor to ceiling with specimen cabinets, their drawers meticulously labeled, interspersed with high-powered optical and electron microscopes. The opposite wall was dominated by a triptych of enormous, curved monitors, linked to a custom-built supercomputing rig she designed with the engineering department, specifically for running her complex geometric and topological models. Between these two worlds, like a bridge, stood a holographic display table, her latest, and most expensive, acquisition. Funded by a hard-won grant from the Canadian Foundation for Innovation, it had cost nearly $500,000, a sum that had caused considerable consternation amongst the university administration. An unjustifiable extravagance for studying old clams, Dr. Vassiliev, Dean Albright had remarked dryly. Elena knew better. Some patterns, some truths, could only be apprehended when freed from the flat canvas of two-dimensional analysis, allowed to breathe in the three dimensions, or perhaps, even more, they once inhabited. Marcus, having shed his outer layers and now nursing a steaming mug of tea, was already prepping their standard analysis suite. "So, what manner of beastie are we dissecting with light and numbers today, Elena?" he asked, his tone light, though he watched her with keen interest. He knew that glint in her eye. "Let's see what secrets you're hiding, little one," Elena whispered to the fossil fragment as she carefully mounted it onto the stage of the scanning electron microscope. The room lights dimmed automatically as the SEM powered up, its hum a familiar comfort. The initial images that resolved on the central monitor confirmed her field assessment. A mollusk shell, likely a very distant, primitive ancestor of modern gastropods. But the microstructure, magnified 10,000 times, was unlike anything in their extensive databases, or indeed, in the published literature of the entire Ediacaran period. The concentric ridges, the growth bands, didn't simply follow a logarithmic spiral, as was common. They exhibited a clear, self-similar branching structure, a fractal pattern that maintained almost perfect proportional consistency across multiple scales of magnification. It was too ordered, too precise. "Run a full fractal dimension analysis," she instructed Marcus, her voice tight with a burgeoning excitement she fought to control. "And cross-reference with the Lyapunov exponent calculations for chaotic systems." Marcus, fingers flying across the keyboard, inputted the commands. The custom rig whirred, its internal fans kicking up a notch. After a few minutes, which stretched like an eternity for Elena, numbers began to populate a data table on one of the side monitors. Getting a consistent fractal dimension reading of 1,37036, he reported, then paused, frowning. "Consistently. That's remarkably non-integer, obviously, but also very stable. And the Lyapunov is consistently negative, suggesting a strange attractor, but one with an incredibly defined basin." Elena's eyebrows, normally arched in a perpetual expression of intellectual inquiry, shot up towards her hairline. 1.370? She repeated, her mind instantly making a connection that sent a shiver down her spine, a curious mixture of intellectual thrill and a deeper, more primal unease. "Marcus, are you familiar with the fine structure constant?" He blinked. "Alpha? From physics?" "Sure. Dimensionless constant. Governs the strength of electromagnetic interaction. Something like 1/137, right?" "Why?" "It's reciprocal, Marcus," Elena said, her gaze fixed on the swirling magnified image of the shell's pattern on the main screen. "The reciprocal of alpha is approximately 137.035999. What we have here, 1.37036, is that value divided by 100. Or perhaps, a fundamental harmonic of it." A heavy silence descended on the lab, broken only by the hum of the equipment and the distant muted sounds of campus life. "That has to be a coincidence, Elena," Marcus said finally, though his voice lacked conviction. The precision was unsettling. "A numerical rhyme. The universe is full of numbers." "In mathematics, Marcus, particularly in the deep structures of reality," Elena replied, her eyes never leaving the screen, "where the ancient patterns seem to mock the limits of their understanding, there are no true coincidences. There are only patterns we haven't fully recognized, connections we are not yet equipped to comprehend." Over the next 3 weeks, Elena became a ghost in her own life, a specter haunting the laboratory. The shell fragment, designated specimen 137 alpha as a private, grim joke, consumed her. She postponed her other research projects, delegated her undergraduate lectures to a protesting Marcus, and took to sleeping on the narrow cot she kept in her adjoining office for precisely such intellectual sieges. Her analysis veered far beyond traditional paleontological methods, plunging deep into the arcane realms of non-Euclidean geometry, singularity theory, and n-dimensional topology, her true passions, the fields where she felt the universe's most profound secrets lay hidden. Conventional biology, evolutionary theory, even her own established models of fractal morphogenesis, failed to provide an adequate framework for specimen 137 alpha. Its growth patterns, when extrapolated using her most advanced algorithms, suggested it had developed according to mathematical principles that seemed overtly hostile to the three-dimensional Euclidean space it ostensibly inhabited. It was as if this simple, ancient organism had somehow encoded a geometric language that predated not only the Cambrian explosion, but perhaps the very stabilization of physical laws as they understood them. It was a language that, according to everything Elena knew, everything accepted by science, simply shouldn't exist on this planet, in this universe. Marcus grew increasingly concerned. He'd seen Elena obsessed before, but this was different. There was a feverish, almost desperate quality to her current fixation. He'd find her staring at the holographic projection of the shell's extrapolated form for hours, muttering equations, her face illuminated by the eerie blue light, making her look like a sibyl communing with an alien oracle. He tried to reason with her, to suggest they bring in other specialists, perhaps a physicist. "It's too early, Marcus," she'd snap, a rare sharpness in her tone. "They wouldn't understand. They'd dismiss it. I need more data. I need the complete model." "Elena, you haven't eaten a proper meal in days," he pressed one evening, holding out a container of lukewarm chow mein he'd picked up. "This isn't healthy." She waved a dismissive hand, her eyes still glued to a cascade of numbers on her monitor. "The pattern, Marcus. It's almost alive. It's learning from the analysis." That was when a genuine knot of fear tightened in Marcus's stomach. He looked at the fossil fragment, inert under its glass shield, then back at Elena's rapt face. He made a decision. He would give her one more week, then he was calling Richard Blackwood, whether Elena liked it or not. Part 2. The Anomalous Fossil. The campus was a ghost town, shrouded in the deep velvet of a Newfoundland night, 3 weeks into Elena's consuming investigation. A low fog had rolled in from the harbor, blanketing the university grounds in a damp, sound-muting shroud. Inside the Earth Sciences building, only Elena's lab showed any sign of life, a solitary rectangle of light against the dark monolithic structure. She was running a new algorithm, one she'd painstakingly written over 72 continuous hours, designed to extrapolate the complete three-dimensional structure of the organism from the maddeningly intricate patterns of specimen 137 alpha. The holographic display table hummed, projecting a ghostly rotating image into the center of the room, the extrapolated form slowly resolving as the computer crunched through petabytes of data. Elena watched, her breath held, her body thrumming with a mixture of caffeine, exhaustion, and an almost unbearable anticipation. The blue light of the hologram cast dancing shadows on her tired face, accentuating the dark circles under her eyes. That can't be right," she muttered, peering closer and adjusting her glasses as if a flaw in her own vision could account for the impossibility coalescing before her. The simulation had finished. The complete shell, or what the algorithm interpreted as such, rotated with serene indifference. She reset the parameters, cross-checked her code for the 10th time, and ran the simulation again. The result was identical, a perfect, breathtakingly complex polyhedron. But it was its sheer number of faces, their flawless symmetry around a central axis, that made her heart hammer against her ribs. A structure that, according to the bedrock principles of Euclidean geometry, could not, exist as a regular solid. In the rigidly defined universe of Euclidean geometry, there are precisely 5 regular convex polyhedra, the Platonic solids. the tetrahedron, 4 faces, the cube, 6 faces, the octahedron, 8 faces, the dodecahedron, 12 faces, and the icosahedron, 20 faces. This had been proven conclusively by the ancient Greeks and had remained an uncontested mathematical truth for millennia. Yet, spinning before her, a ghostly blueprint drawn in light, was evidence of a sixth. This shape possessed exactly 137 perfectly congruent faces. Elena stumbled back, her hand flying to her mouth. A wave of vertigo washed over her. This was not just an anomalous fossil. It was a refutation of millennia of mathematical certainty. Or, it was a sign that she was finally teetering on the edge of madness. She reached for her phone, her fingers trembling, intending to call her former doctoral advisor, Professor Emeritus Richard Blackwood at Princeton. Richard, a man whose intellect she revered, who had always championed her unconventional ideas. Then she glanced at the clock. Nearly 3 a.m. Even Richard would balk at a call at this hour, especially one freighted with such an outlandish claim. She opted for an email, her fingers flying across the virtual keyboard, attaching the raw data, the algorithm, and a rendered image of the impossible structure. Richard, I've discovered something. I hesitate to even write the word impossible, but the evidence is persistent. The Ediacaran shell fragment from Mistaken Point, specimen 137 alpha. Its complete extrapolated form reveals a perfectly symmetrical 137-faced regular polyhedron, a sixth Platonic solid. I have verified the results 17 times. Different modeling parameters, stress-tested algorithms, even a manual check of the core geometric postulates. This shouldn't exist in Euclidean space, yet the fossil's growth matrix is an undeniable testament to its formation according to these principles. Could our understanding of Precambrian geometry, perhaps even the fundamental geometric nature of space during that era, be fundamentally flawed? Or is this something else entirely? Call me as soon as you get this, regardless of the hour. I fear I am either on the verge of the most significant discovery of my life, or I am losing my mind. Elena. She hesitated for a full minute before pressing send, acutely aware of how the claim would sound. Richard had always been her staunchest advocate, a bulwark against the more conservative elements of academia, but even he would struggle with this. Still, the evidence shimmered before her, rotating with a silent, crystalline grace in the holographic display. She sent the email and, too wired to even consider sleep, turned back to her whiteboard, which was already a chaotic tapestry of equations, diagrams, and frantic scribbles. As the first gray light of dawn began to creep over the muted city, Elena's office looked like the aftermath of a mathematical storm. Coffee cups littered every surface, and the whiteboard was a palimpsest of desperate calculations. The most promising avenue, the one that didn't immediately require rewriting the entirety of known physics, involved venturing into the strange, counterintuitive world of hyperbolic geometry. In hyperbolic space, the sum of angles in a triangle could be less than 180 degrees, parallel lines could diverge, and infinitely more complex regular tessellations and polyhedra were possible. But that solution, while mathematically elegant, opened an even more disturbing Pandora's box of questions. Why would an ancient mollusk, one of Earth's earliest complex multicellular organisms, develop a shell structure that conformed to hyperbolic rather than Euclidean geometry? What possible evolutionary advantage could such a thing confer? Or was the geometry of the universe itself different then? Richard's call came through on her office line just after 8 a.m., startling her from a half-doze over a complex tensor calculus textbook. Elena? It's Richard. I got your email. His voice, usually warm and resonant, carried a careful, deliberate neutrality, the hallmark of a scientist confronted with an extraordinary claim, unwilling to dismiss it outright but equally wary of embracing it too readily. Richard, she breathed, relief and anxiety warring in her voice. You saw the renderings? The data? I did. And I've spent the last 4 hours running your data through some of Princeton's own modeling systems, including a rather sophisticated quantum geometry simulator we usually reserve for string theory conjectures. Elena, are you absolutely certain about these readings? There's no instrumentation error, no subtle corruption in the fossil itself that could lead to these patterns. I've run the analysis 17 times, Richard, as I said. Different parameters, different algorithms, even different sections of the fragment where possible. The result is consistent. 137 faces, perfectly symmetrical, conforming to no known regular polyhedron classification in R3 space. A long pause hummed over the line. Elena could almost hear the gears turning in Richard's formidable brain. You understand the monumental implications of what you're suggesting? That either my equipment, your equipment, and all ancillary checks are malfunctioning in a remarkably consistent and bizarrely creative manner. Or that the fundamental geometry of our universe was different during the Ediacaran period, Richard finished, his voice dropping. Or, more radically, that this organism didn't develop in a purely Euclidean framework. Elena, that's not a small claim. That's a paradigm obliterator. There's more, she continued, her voice barely a whisper, though she knew she and Marcus were the only ones in the lab. Marcus, in fact, had entered her office during the call, his expression etched with concern, holding out another cup of coffee which she waved away. The structure itself, the 137 faces. Richard, it isn't just a random number. It seems to correlate directly with the reciprocal of the fine structure constant. The faces aren't just randomly distributed. They appear to follow a developmental pattern that, when mapped over time, mirrors certain solutions to quantum field equations. It's as if the shell's growth was a physical manifestation of fundamental quantum interactions. Another pause, this one even longer, deeper. Elena could hear a faint scratching sound, Richard likely jotting down notes. Elena, he said finally, his voice imbued with a new gravity, I'm booking the first available flight to St. John's. This isn't something we should discuss further over an unsecure line. Can you secure the specimen and all related data? And I mean all of it. Off-network if possible. Of course. It's already isolated. And Elena? One more thing. Don't share this with anyone else yet. Not a soul. Not until we've independently verified everything, and I mean everything, to the nth degree. The warning was almost superfluous. Elena knew the brutal gauntlet that awaited any paradigm-shifting discovery. Initial dismissal, followed by entrenched hostility, and only then, after overwhelming, undeniable evidence, grudging acceptance. She needed an arsenal of irrefutable proof before even whispering this to the wider scientific community. And now, Richard's ominous tone about secure lines and isolating data added a new layer of unease. It wasn't just about scientific skepticism anymore. Marcus, who had overheard most of Elena's side of the conversation, looked pale. Sixth Platonic solid? Fine structure constant? Elena, what in God's name have you found? I don't know, Marcus, she admitted, the adrenaline that had sustained her for weeks beginning to drain away, leaving a vast, hollow exhaustion. But Richard is coming. And he's worried. Maybe we should be too, Marcus said quietly, looking at the fossil fragment, now resting inside a small lead-lined box on Elena's desk, as if it were a radioactive isotope. Some doors, maybe they're best left unopened. Elena, however, knew it was far too late for such sentiments. The door was already ajar, and a strange, mathematically precise wind was blowing through. Richard Blackwood arrived 2 days later, a whirlwind of intellectual energy despite the ravages of a transatlantic red-eye flight. His once dark beard was now almost entirely white, a stark contrast to his still sharp, penetrating blue eyes, the eyes of a man who had spent a lifetime peering into the universe's deepest enigmas. He brought with him several Pelican cases filled with specialized equipment from Princeton's Advanced Physics Department, instruments Elena recognized as being usually reserved for experiments in quantum entanglement and high-energy particle detection. Their reunion was brief, the customary pleasantries quickly giving way to the urgency of the discovery. "Show me everything, Elena," he said, his voice resonating with a quiet intensity as they stood in her lab, the holographic projector already fired up at his request. "Start from the beginning." For the next week, the lab became their world. They worked in seamless collaboration, Richard's profound expertise in quantum mechanics and cosmology complementing Elena's mastery of biomathematics and non-Euclidean geometry. Marcus, initially relegated to running errands and ensuring they remembered to eat, quickly proved his worth, his paleontological knowledge providing crucial context for the fossil's Ediacaran origins and his steady hand with the delicate SEM proving invaluable. He became the silent, observant anchor to their increasingly esoteric theorizing. The three of them formed an unlikely trinity, bound by the gravity of the impossible object in their midst. They reran every analysis, every simulation. Richard's equipment confirmed Elena's findings, then added layers of complexity she hadn't even considered. The shell fragment emitted faint, almost undetectable Cherenkov radiation. Its internal structure showed quantum coherency at a macroscopic level, something thought impossible at room temperature. On their fifth night of continuous work, fueled by endless coffee and a shared, nerve-shredding excitement, Richard, staring at a complex phase diagram their combined analyses had produced, finally voiced the thought that had been haunting both their peripheries. "The pattern isn't just non-Euclidean, Elena," he said, his voice hushed. It's more than that. Look at these growth patterns, these isotopic ratios. They suggest this organism didn't just grow in a space with different geometry. It's as if it existed in a localized pocket of spacetime where the fundamental physical constants themselves were different. Specifically, look here, he pointed to a section of the data, these decay rates, these energy transitions. They strongly suggest a universe, or at least a region of it, where the cosmological constants were all amiss. Elena felt a cold dread seep into her bones, far colder than any Newfoundland wind. "That's impossible, Richard," she replied, the words automatic, a reflexive defense against an idea so radical it threatened to unravel everything. "The value of the cosmological constants are all fundamental. If they were that drastically different, matter as we conceive of it couldn't exist," Richard finished, his eyes locking with hers. "Precisely. Which leads to two profoundly unsettling possibilities. Either our entire understanding of fundamental physics is far more incomplete than we ever imagined, or—" He didn't complete the thought. He didn't need to. The implication hung heavy and suffocating in the air between them, as tangible as the faint, almost imperceptible hum that now seemed to emanate from specimen 137 alpha. Or this shell, this fragment of an ancient lifeform, did not originate in our universe at all. Marcus, who had been silently observing, finally spoke, his voice strained. "Are you saying it's alien? Like actually alien?" Elena looked at the young paleontologist, his face a mixture of awe and terror. She felt a pang of responsibility, of guilt almost, for dragging him into this maelstrom. "We're saying, Marcus," she said gently, "that we are deep in uncharted territory, and all our maps are wrong." Part 3. The Mathematical Abyss. The breakthrough, if such a terrifying revelation could be termed as such, arrived unceremoniously at 2:37 a.m. on a Tuesday, amidst the stale scent of coffee and the quiet hum of overworked machinery. Elena, her eyes gritty with fatigue, had been running a new series of simulations on the holographic table, attempting to map the shell's growth pattern not just in 3 spatial dimensions, but over time, incorporating its developmental stages into a 4-dimensional spatio-temporal model. Richard was hunched over a portable mass spectrometer, analyzing minute scrapings from the fossil's interior surface, muttering about anomalous isotopic ratios. Marcus had finally succumbed to exhaustion a few hours earlier, asleep on the cot in Elena's office. Suddenly, the main computer chimed, a soft, melodic tone indicating a completed analysis. But the image that coalesced on the holographic display was anything but soft or melodic. "Richard, look at this," Elena called, her voice tight with a mixture of dawning comprehension and profound apprehension. He hurried over, peering at the intricate, shifting patterns of light. The latest simulation, the 4D developmental model, showed something utterly extraordinary, something that made the earlier discovery of the 137-faced polyhedron seem almost mundane by comparison. As the organism hypothetically grew, its shell structure appeared to phase or oscillate between different geometric states. For brief periods, its geometry would conform to standard Euclidean principles, then, abruptly, it would transition into a hyperbolic state, only to shift again into something that looked suspiciously like elliptic geometry, before cycling back. It was as if it existed simultaneously, or sequentially, in multiple, mutually exclusive mathematical realities. "It's like watching a creature, swimming between different mathematical oceans," Richard murmured, his face illuminated by the ghostly light, his scientific detachment warring with sheer disbelief. "And the transitions, Richard, look." Elena pointed to a data overlay she'd just activated. "They correlate perfectly with the 137 facets. Each facet doesn't just represent a static face of a polyhedron. It's a node, a gateway, or perhaps a representation of a distinct geometric state transition point in its life cycle. It's not just a structure. It's a mathematical process made manifest." Richard's expression, already grave, darkened further. "Elena, do you realize what this implies? If this organism could actively, or even passively, transition between distinct geometric states as part of its natural development, it implies a fundamental geometric fluidity during the Precambrian era," she finished, the words tasting like ash in her mouth. "That the fixed, immutable Euclidean geometry we experience today, the very fabric of our spatial reality, wasn't always constant. Perhaps it hadn't fully crystallized yet." They stared at each other, the sheer, earth-shattering weight of the implication pressing down on them. Modern physics, the entire edifice of scientific understanding, was built upon the foundational assumption that the fundamental constants and geometric principles of the universe were just that, constant, unchanging throughout cosmic history since the initial moments after the Big Bang. This tiny, unassuming fossil fragment screamed otherwise. It suggested that the universe itself might have an evolutionary geometry. The following morning, as if the universe itself were conspiring to validate their terrifying hypothesis, Elena received an unexpected email. It was from Dr. Hiroshi Nakamura, a cosmologist at Tokyo University with whom she had collaborated on a paper concerning mathematical analogues in galactic spiral formations years earlier. Hiroshi was brilliant, eccentric, and one of the few people Elena trusted to entertain truly outlandish ideas. The subject line read simply, "Query, anomalous CMB anisotropies, seen this?" The email contained a link to a preprint paper recently uploaded to the AR-14 server, authored by a team at the Max Planck Institute for Astrophysics. It described newly detected subtle, but statistically significant anisotropic patterns in the cosmic microwave background radiation, the faint thermal echo of the Big Bang. These patterns, the paper argued, couldn't be adequately explained by standard cosmological models, including inflationary theory. Elena's blood ran cold as she read the cautious but clear conclusion. The data hinted that in the earliest epochs after the Big Bang, for a period far longer than previously theorized, space-time itself might have exhibited properties consistent with non-Euclidean, specifically hyperbolic, geometry, only gradually settling into its current, apparently flat Euclidean form as the universe cooled, expanded, and matter condensed. She immediately forwarded the paper to Richard, adding only a terse comment. "This cannot be a coincidence. The timing, the implications." His reply came minutes later, equally stark. No, Elena, it can't. The universe seems to be speaking to us. And I find its tone deeply unsettling. That afternoon, a grim determination settled over them. They began to compile their findings into a preliminary paper, a manuscript that they knew would either revolutionize multiple fields of science or destroy their careers utterly. They titled it, Evidence of Geometric Phase Transitions in Precambrian Organisms. Potential Correlation with Early Universe Non-Euclidean Cosmological Epochs. Elena knew it was a verbal grenade, but the convergence of evidence, from their microscopic fossil to the macroscopic echoes of the Big Bang, was too compelling, too profound, to ignore. As she was formatting the references, her office phone shrilled, making both her and Richard jump. It was the departmental secretary, her voice unusually flustered. Dr. Vassiliev? Dean Albright requests your presence in his office immediately. He said it's rather urgent. Unusual, certainly, but not immediately alarming. Perhaps it was about the grant renewal for the holographic projector. Elena exchanged a glance with Richard. I'll go. You keep working on the data encryption and backup protocols we discussed. And Richard, be ready for anything. Always am, Elena, he said, though his smile didn't quite reach his eyes. When Elena arrived at the dean's usually staid administrative office, the atmosphere was anything but normal. Dean Albright, a woman whose unflappability was legendary, looked pale and nervous, perched awkwardly on the edge of her ornate leather chair. But it was the other two occupants of the room that sent a genuine chill down Elena's spine, a coldness that had nothing to do with the office's overzealous air conditioning. Two men, dressed in impeccably tailored but nondescript dark suits, rose as she entered. They had the watchful, neutral expressions of men accustomed to observing without being observed, men who blended into any background yet radiated an unmistakable aura of authority. Dr. Vassiliev, one of the men said, his voice smooth, devoid of any discernible accent. He offered a hand that felt cool and dry. I'm Dr. William Hayes, from the National Science Foundation's Office of Special Projects. This is my colleague, Dr. James Foster, from the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency. DARPA. The acronym echoed in Elena's mind like a muffled alarm bell. We understand, Dr. Vassiliev, Hayes continued, his eyes, the color of washed-out denim, never leaving hers, that you've made a rather unusual discovery. Elena felt her carefully constructed composure begin to fray. How could you possibly know about our research? We haven't published anything. We haven't even submitted a manuscript. Hayes and Foster exchanged a brief, almost imperceptible glance. Let's just say, Dr. Vassiliev, that certain keywords and data patterns in university research systems, especially those connected to federally funded equipment, tend to trigger alerts, Hayes replied smoothly, a slight, unreadable smile playing on his lips. Particularly when those patterns involve fundamental physical constants, anomalous geometric structures, and, shall we say, unusually high computational resource allocation. Your discovery, Dr. Vassiliev, has significant national security implications, Foster added, his tone flatter, more direct, making it unequivocally clear this was not merely a courtesy visit or a funding discussion. We'd like to discuss the immediate transfer of your specimen, all related data, and your ongoing research to a more secure facility. For national interest, of course. Elena's spine stiffened. This is an academic institution, gentlemen. Our research, when verified and peer-reviewed, will be published openly, as is the standard vital practice of science. Dean Albright cleared her throat nervously, wringing his hands. Elena, perhaps we should consider their offer. The funding package they're proposing for the university, and for your future research under their auspices, is, well, it's extraordinarily generous. She avoided Elena's gaze. Elena looked at her dean, an older woman she had respected, with a surge of disbelief and anger. This isn't about funding, Laura. This is about understanding what could be the most profound scientific discovery of this century, perhaps of all time. It belongs to humanity, not to a black budget. It's about both, Dr. Vassiliev, Hayes interjected, his voice still unervingly calm. We are prepared to fully fund your research, provide you with resources beyond your wildest dreams, for the next decade, even longer. All we require, in return is discretion, collaboration, and exclusive access to your findings until such time as we deem them suitable for broader dissemination. The Gilded Cage. Elena thought of the shimmering, impossible shell fragment in her lab, of its 137 silent, knowing faces, of the terrifying equations suggesting a universe fundamentally different, more malleable, more dangerous than they had ever understood. She thought of Richard, who had staked his considerable reputation on standing by her discovery, and of Marcus, whose youthful scientific idealism was currently being put through an existential grinder. I need to consult with my research partner, Professor Blackwood, before making any decisions, she said finally, her voice firmer than she felt. Of course, Foster replied, his smile chillingly devoid of warmth. You have 24 hours to consider our generous offer, Dr. Vassiliev. After that, should you decline, we will unfortunately be forced to pursue alternative arrangements to secure assets vital to national interest. The threat, though couched in bureaucratic euphemism, was as clear and cold as a shard of ice. As she walked out of the dean's office, her legs unsteady, Elena knew she and Richard didn't have 24 hours. They had, at most, until nightfall. Back at the lab, she found Richard already rapidly packing sensitive equipment and Marcus frantically wiping server logs. The tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a knife. We have a problem, they both said, almost simultaneously, as she burst through the door. Men from the NSF and DARPA, she began, breathless. I know, Richard interrupted, his face grim. Princeton security called me on a burner phone I keep for contingencies. They've had similar visitors, very polite, very insistent, asking about my sudden trip to Newfoundland, my recent communications, and my renewed academic interest in non-Euclidean geometry and its potential applications. Elena felt her stomach clench. What do they want with Precambrian fossils? With pure mathematics? Richard's expression was bleak. He paused from carefully placing specimen 137 alpha into a heavily shielded transport case he'd brought from Princeton. Think about it, Elena. If your theory is correct, if our combined findings are even close to the truth, if the fundamental geometry of spacetime was once fluid, malleable, and could transition between states, then the implications are beyond enormous. Whoever could understand, and potentially manipulate, those transitions, those fundamental constants, they would wield power beyond imagining. The ability to reshape reality itself. You sound like you're talking about weapons, Elena whispered, horrified. Or something far, far worse, Richard said, his voice dropping even lower. The fine structure constant, Elena, determines how matter interacts with light, how atoms form and bind, how chemistry functions. If it, and the geometry it operates within, could be locally altered, selectively changed. He didn't need to finish. Elena understood. Reality itself could become a programmable, weaponizable medium. Cities could be unraveled at a subatomic level, enemy armies dissolved into incoherent quarks, new elements forged, energy conjured from the vacuum. The strategic implications were terrifying and absolute. We need to protect our research, she said decisively. And the fossil. Not just from them, but perhaps for them, for everyone, if what it represents is as dangerous as I'm beginning to fear. Richard nodded, his movements precise and economical. I've already initiated contact with a trusted colleague in Copenhagen, a specialist in quantum data archiving at the Niels Bohr Institute. We can encrypt and transmit our core findings to a secure, isolated server there. It's a long shot, but it's something. As for the fossil itself, I know someone, Elena said, an idea forming. Dr. Alastair Finch. A former classmate of mine from Cambridge. He's now a senior curator at the Natural History Museum in London, in their deep archive section. If we can get it to him, get it catalogued under an utterly innocuous, deeply boring description, lost in their millions of specimens. They worked through the remaining hours of the afternoon and into the evening with a focused, desperate energy. Systematically, they backed up terabytes of data, encrypting it with multi-layered quantum keys Richard had designed, and initiated segmented uploads to the Copenhagen server. They wiped the university systems clean of their most sensitive findings, leaving only enough preliminary, ambiguous data to suggest their research was still in its earliest, most speculative stages, a trail of breadcrumbs leading nowhere. As Elena carefully packed specimen 137 alpha into Richard's shielded case, preparing it for its clandestine journey, she felt a strange, subtle vibration emanate from it, a barely perceptible thrum against her gloved fingers. For a fleeting, vertiginous moment, the air around the specimen seemed to shimmer, to ripple, as if the light itself were bending around it in impossible, non-Euclidean pathways. "Richard, did you see that?" she breathed, her heart pounding. He was staring at the case, his expression unreadable, his face pale in the dim lab light. "Yes," he said slowly. "And it's not the first time today. I've noticed it happening with increasing frequency, increasing amplitude, as we've focused our attention on it, as we've discussed its implications." "What does it mean?" Elena asked, a new, deeper fear beginning to bloom within her, a fear that transcended government agents and academic theft. Richard closed the shielded case with a decisive click, the clasp sounding unnaturally loud in the sudden silence. "It means we're right, Elena," he said, his voice heavy. "It means this isn't just a passive artifact. It's responding. And it means we're dealing with something far more significant, far more aware, than either of us initially realized." Just as they were preparing to leave the lab, their scant personal belongings packed, the critical data either transmitted or secured on hardened drives, Elena's personal laptop, still connected to the university network for the final data wipe, chimed with an incoming email notification. It was from Hiroshi Nakamura in Tokyo. The subject line was a single, stark word: urgent. "Elena-san, Richard-san, there has been an extraordinary and deeply alarming development. Our radio observatory array, the one we've been using for the CMB follow-up, has detected highly unusual, coherent gravitational wave patterns. Their mathematical structure, their frequency and modulation, precisely match the n-dimensional geometric signature you inquired about regarding your Ediacaran specimen. These patterns have no identifiable astrophysical source. No neutron star merger, no black hole collision, nothing. They simply appeared 3 days ago, localized, and have been increasing in intensity. Elena, this timing corresponds exactly to when you informed me you began your intensive, focused analysis of the specimen's deeper structure. This cannot be coincidence. This is impossible. It is as if your localized examination is triggering, or being answered by, changes on a vast, perhaps even cosmic, quantum level. Exercise extreme caution. I am attempting to secure a hardened communication line. Will call when possible. Be careful. Hiroshi. Elena showed the email to Richard, whose face, already pale, turned ashen. "It's responding to our analysis," he whispered, the words barely audible. "Our observation, our understanding, is somehow stimulating it, completing a circuit we didn't even know existed." "That's not possible," Elena protested, her scientific training rebelling against the implication, even as her intuition screamed its truth. "Observation can't cause that kind of effect on this scale." 3 weeks ago, Elena, you would have said a sixth regular Platonic solid wasn't possible, Richard reminded her grimly. A month ago, You'd have laughed at the idea of the fine structure constant being different in the past. We are so far off the map, our old rules of possible are meaningless. We need to move. Now. Hefting their precious, terrifying cargo and essential gear, they slipped out of the Earth Sciences building into the enveloping darkness, using a little-known service exit. Neither of them noticed the black, unmarked sedan parked in the deep shadows across the street, its engine silent. Nor did they see the small, silent drone that detached itself from the rooftop of the adjacent engineering building, its optics locking onto their retreating figures as it hovered, bat-like, against the starless, fog-laden sky. Their 24 hours had just run out. Part 4. The Cosmic Pattern. The safe house, if such a dilapidated structure could be graced with the term, was an old fishing cabin nestled deep in the rugged, sparsely populated interior of rural Nova Scotia. It had belonged to Richard's maternal grandfather, a reclusive trapper and fisherman, and had stood empty for over a decade. Its isolation was its primary virtue. No close neighbors for several kilometers, unreliable cell reception, and a single rutted dirt road as its only access point, offering a clear view of anyone approaching. Most importantly, it possessed a small, damp root cellar with thick, fieldstone walls, which, with considerable effort, could be jury-rigged into a makeshift, electromagnetically shielded laboratory. They had driven almost non-stop for 2 days, taking winding backroads, swapping vehicles twice thanks to Richard's surprisingly extensive network of old academic and not-so-academic friends. From subgenius and Discordianism newsgroups, people who asked few questions and valued discretion. Elena, fueled by caffeine and a gnawing dread, had handled most of the navigation, while Richard drove with a grim, focused intensity. They had managed to leave Newfoundland on a small, chartered cargo ferry just hours before. As Richard's contacts later confirmed, Hayes and Foster returned to Memorial University with what was described as federal documentation of overriding national security interest that would have compelled the university administration to surrender all research materials, equipment, and personnel related to Project 137 Alpha. We have maybe 3 days, 4 at the outside, before they track us here, Richard estimated grimly as he carefully unpacked the shielded case containing specimen 137 Alpha onto a makeshift workbench in the root cellar. The air was cold and smelled of damp earth and decay. Less, if they've managed to bypass the countermeasures I put on our electronics, or if one of my friends has a looser tongue than I credit them for. Elena nodded, already setting up their essential equipment. A portable SEM they'd borrowed from a sister lab, their hardened laptops, and a sophisticated array of sensors Richard had brought. Then we work quickly. We need to understand what it is, what it wants, before they find us. Or before it. She didn't finish the sentence, but the image of the rippling air around the fossil, the gravitational waves Hiroshi had detected, filled the unspoken void. Without the sophisticated infrastructure of their university laboratory, they were forced to improvise, their ingenuity stretched to its limits. Richard, with a surprising aptitude for practical engineering, converted an ancient, rusting refrigerator into a makeshift Faraday cage, lining it with copper mesh stripped from old coaxial cables they found in the cabin's attic. Elena reprogrammed their portable SEM's control software, pushing its limited capabilities to perform the most critical structural and quantum coherence measurements they needed. Days and nights blurred into a single continuous stretch of frantic work, punctuated by brief, fitful periods of sleep and hastily prepared meals. The isolation, the constant threat of discovery, and the ever-increasing strangeness of the fossil itself created a pressure cooker atmosphere in the tiny cellar. Marcus Chin was a constant, unspoken presence in Elena's thoughts. She had insisted Richard contact one of his reliable people to check on him. The news, when it came via a heavily encrypted message, was both a relief and a source of profound guilt. Marcus was safe, but he had been suspended from his duties at the university, his lab access revoked, pending an internal investigation into the disappearance of Dr. Vassiliev and Professor Blackwood. He was, for all intents and purposes, under house arrest, his career in jeopardy because of her discovery. The weight of that settled heavily on Elena. On their second night in the cabin, as a fierce, unseasonable thunderstorm raged outside, mirroring the tempest in their minds, a breakthrough occurred, a moment of terrible clarity that changed everything. Elena had been running a complex simulation, comparing the four-dimensional growth matrix of specimen 137 alpha not just to early universe cosmological models, as suggested by Hiroshi's findings, but also to theoretical models of quantum foam and string theory compactifications, the very architecture of reality at the Planck scale. Suddenly, the algorithm flagged a convergence, a mathematical resonance so precise, so statistically improbable, that it couldn't be anything other than a direct correlation. "Richard," she called, her voice barely above a whisper, a tremor running through her. "Richard, I think I understand what we're looking at. What this is." He joined her at the flickering laptop screen, his face drawn and tired, but his eyes instantly sharp and focused as he absorbed the complex equations and the stark, beautiful, terrifying graph that represented their solution. "This isn't just a mollusk that evolved in a strange place, Richard," she continued, her voice trembling with the enormity of the revelation. "This organism, or the intelligence that designed its growth pattern, didn't just experience a period when the universe's geometry was settling. It is a direct, biological manifestation of the mathematical principles that governed the universe during the first femtoseconds after the Big Bang, a period when space-time itself was transitioning from a chaotic, high-dimensional, non-Euclidean state into the relatively stable, 3+1-dimensional Euclidean form we experience today. That would mean the transition, the crystallization of our universe's geometry and physical laws, happened much later, or far more unevenly, than any current model suggests," Richard breathed, his mind reeling. "Not just in the first seconds after the Big Bang, but perhaps echoes of it, or pockets of it, persisted for billions of years, at least until the Ediacaran period." Elena nodded, her gaze distant, fixed on an image only she could see. "Or perhaps the transition was never truly complete. Perhaps our settled Euclidean universe is just one stable state in a far vaster, multi-layered cosmic foam. Perhaps there were other bubbles, regions where different geometric principles, different physical laws, apply or even coexist. Like islands of alternative physics in a sea of conventional reality," Richard mused, the metaphor both poetic and chilling. "Each with its own unique set of constants, its own dimensional structure." "Exactly. And this organism, this shell, evolved, or was constructed, in one such bubble, a region where non-Euclidean geometry and hyperdimensional physics persisted long after the surrounding universe had settled into its current, more constrained form. Or perhaps it's a seed, a key, designed to bridge those realities." The implications were staggering, world-shattering. It suggested that the universe's fundamental constants weren't truly constant at all, but rather emergent properties, settling into their current values over unimaginable eons. It implied that remnants of these primordial, transitional states might still exist, cosmic cul-de-sacs, hidden dimensions, or even entire parallel universes where reality operated according to a different rulebook. As if responding to their dawning, terrifying comprehension, specimen 137 alpha, resting within its makeshift Faraday cage, began to emit a faint, pulsating glow. At first, Elena thought it was a reflection from their computer screens, or a trick of her exhausted eyes. But the light was intrinsic, a soft, ethereal luminescence that had a quality that defied easy description. It was simultaneously blue and yet not blue, present and yet subtly absent, casting shadows that didn't align with any visible light source in the cramped cellar. Richard approached it cautiously, a handheld Geiger counter and a custom-built quantum fluctuation detector in his hands. "The Cherenkov radiation is spiking," he said, his voice tight with a mixture of scientific fascination and raw fear. "And the local quantum field around it is becoming highly active, highly coherent. It's as if our understanding, our focused mental energy, is somehow awakening it, fueling it." That's not scientifically possible, Richard, Elena protested, the words a hollow echo of her rapidly crumbling scientific certainty. Neither is a living fossil embodying transdimensional geometry and the fine structure constant as an integer, Elena, Richard replied softly, his eyes never leaving the glowing shell. Yet here we are. The glow intensified, and with it came a subtle visible distortion in the air surrounding the specimen, a heat haze rippling effect, as if they were viewing it through turbulent water, or as if space itself were warping. More alarming were the readings flooding in from their array of instruments. Localized fluctuations in the electromagnetic field, gravitational microanomalies, and most disturbingly, the fine structure constant, Richard reported, his voice strained, his scientific curiosity momentarily overriding his evident concern as he stared at a wildly fluctuating graph on a handheld monitor. Within a 10-centimeter radius of the specimen, it's shifting, fluctuating between its standard value of approximately 1/137 and, dear God, it is off-scale, values that should make atomic stability, any form of coherent matter, utterly impossible. Elena felt a sudden, intense pressure building in her ears, a sensation akin to a rapid, uncontrolled ascent in an unpressurized aircraft. The very air in the cellar seemed to thicken, to resist movement. Richard, I think we should. She never completed the sentence. Specimen 137 alpha suddenly emitted a silent, concussive pulse of energy. Not light, not sound, but something else, something that felt like a pure, focused wave of altered physics. It slammed into both scientists, knocking them backward off their rickety stools. When Elena regained her senses moments later, gasping for breath, the cellar looked superficially unchanged. But her eyes were drawn to the workbench. A perfect sphere of shimmering, distorted reality now surrounded the specimen. Within that sphere, approximately 20 centimeters in diameter, light bent at impossible, sickening angles. Small, mundane objects that had been on the table near the fossil, a pencil, a stray paperclip, a forgotten rubber band, now floated, suspended within the sphere, their forms twisted, stretched, and compressed as if viewed through a grotesquely powerful, infinitely complex lens. It's created a localized region of non-Euclidean space, Richard whispered, his voice filled with a horrified awe. He had a trickle of blood running from one nostril, but his scientific mind was still miraculously functioning. A bubble of alternative physics. Stable. Elena scrambled closer, her fear momentarily eclipsed by a surge of desperate, fascinated curiosity. The geometry within that sphere. Richard, it matches the structure we extrapolated. The 137-faced polyhedron. It's manifesting physically. The sixth Platonic solid, Richard confirmed, his gaze transfixed. No longer a mathematical abstraction, but a physical, localized reality. As they watched, paralyzed between terror and wonder, the shimmering distortion, the bubble of alien geometry, began to expand. Slowly, almost imperceptibly at first, then with a gathering, undeniable momentum. Objects at the very edge of the expanding boundary underwent subtle, mind-bending transformations. The straight edge of a forgotten metal ruler began to curve visibly while somehow remaining demonstrably straight to the touch, creating a paradoxical visual and tactile effect that strained the very limits of their perception and sanity. The faint, almost inaudible hum they had noticed earlier was now a tangible throb in the air, resonating deep within their chests, a sound that felt like the universe itself was groaning under an unbearable strain. It's growing, Elena realized, her voice choked with a mounting visceral alarm. Richard, if this continues, if this field expands beyond this cellar, beyond this house, if the region where conventional physical laws no longer apply expands to encompass anything populated, Richard's voice trailed off, the unspoken implications too vast, too terrible to articulate fully. A world where Euclidean geometry was no longer the dominant paradigm, where the fine structure constant could shift at will, would be utterly uninhabitable, incomprehensible, for any life form that had evolved under Earth's current, stable physical laws. Human bodies, so much different from mollusks, with their intricate biochemistry utterly dependent on the precise, unwavering values of those constants, would simply cease to function, their atoms unbinding, their molecules dissolving into primordial soup. Buildings, cities, the very planet itself, would collapse, unravel, transform, as straight lines became curves, right angles ceased to exist, and the fundamental forces that held matter together were rewritten. Reality as they knew it would dissolve into an unimaginable, alien maelstrom. The storm outside seemed to redouble its fury, lightning striking unervingly close to the cabin, the thunderclaps merging into a continuous, deafening roar. It felt as if the planet itself were recoiling from the abomination blossoming in its heart. Part 5. The Non-Euclidean Truth. We have to contain it, Elena decided, her voice cutting through the cacophony of the storm and the thrumming of the expanding anomaly. Scientific curiosity, the driving force of her entire life, had finally, irrevocably, given way to a primal, desperate urgency. The Faraday cage, even our makeshift one, it seemed to slow its initial activation. Perhaps intense, focused electromagnetic shielding can limit its expansion, or even reverse it. They worked with the frantic, adrenaline-fueled energy of the doomed, surrounding the growing sphere of distorted reality with every conductive material they could find in the dilapidated cabin. They unwound ancient coils of copper wiring from rotted appliances, tore apart the cabin's old mattresses for their metal springs, even sacrificed Richard's spare laptop, stripping it for its circuit boards and metallic components, pressing them against the rippling boundary of the alien geometry. The expansion visibly slowed, the leading edge of the distortion seeming to meet a new resistance. But it didn't stop. The thrumming intensified, and the light within the sphere grew brighter, its impossible colors shifting, cycling through hues that had no name, no place in the human visual spectrum. "It's not enough," Richard said grimly, his face slick with sweat, his hands bleeding from wrestling with rusted metal. "We're just annoying it. We need to understand what's triggering its growth, its stability. What changed in the last 24 hours that could have catalyzed this manifestation?" Elena's mind raced, replaying their recent work, their conversations, their desperate theories, searching for the variable, the catalyst. The simulation, she realized suddenly, her eyes widening in horrified comprehension. The four-dimensional developmental model. When we mapped its growth structure against the early universe cosmological patterns, against Hiroshi's CMB data, we didn't just observe it, Richard. We effectively created a mathematical resonance. We struck a tuning fork that precisely matched its fundamental frequency, its resonant geometric signature across multiple realities. "So we activated it," Richard concluded, his voice flat, devoid of inflection. "Our analysis, our attempt to understand it, completed a circuit we didn't even know existed. We fed it the missing variable, the key to unlocking its full potential in our spacetime." "Which means," Elena said, a desperate, fragile hope flickering within her, "we might be able to break that circuit. If we can introduce a conflicting pattern, a powerful mathematical dissonance, a counterfrequency, we might be able to disrupt the resonance, collapse the field." They scrambled back to their remaining functional laptop, their fingers flying across the keyboard, racing against time and the encroaching alien geometry to develop an algorithm that would generate the necessary counterpattern, a blast of chaotic, anti-symmetrical mathematical noise. Outside the cellar, the unseasonable storm had become a raging tempest of almost supernatural intensity. Lightning struck with terrifying frequency, illuminating the surrounding woods in brief, stark flashes, the thunder an almost continuous artillery barrage. The very air crackled with an unnatural charge. "The atmospheric disturbance," Richard noted grimly, glancing up at the cellar's small, grime-encrusted window. "It's not just local weather anymore. The effect of this This thing is already influencing mesoscale meteorological patterns. It's warping more than just the space in this room. Elena's fingers flew across the keyboard, her mind a maelstrom of complex equations and desperate inspiration. She took their original simulation, the one that had triggered the full manifestation, and began to invert its core mathematical principles, introducing elements of stochastic randomness, forcing violations of its perfect 137-fold symmetry, aiming for maximum geometric dissonance. If we can broadcast this counterpattern through our SEM's modified scanning array, its electromagnetic field generator might be powerful enough to disrupt the resonance, if we can get it close enough. As Richard, his face a mask of grim determination, began to reconfigure their battered scanner, jury-rigging a directional antenna, Elena found herself staring, mesmerized and horrified, at the slowly expanding sphere of altered reality. Its surface now roiled with impossible colors and shifting perspectives. Within its translucent depths, she glimpsed things. Shapes that seemed to flicker and shift between dimensions, entities that existed as both points and planes, lines and volumes simultaneously. For a brief, terrifying, sanity-shredding moment, she thought she saw a structure resembling the complete, infinitely complex shell they had extrapolated from their tiny fragment. But this structure was unimaginably vast, intricate beyond comprehension, as if their fossil fragment were merely a single cell, a single atom, of a much larger, transdimensional organism or construct. And it was aware. It was looking back. "Elena, we're ready. Or as ready as we'll ever be," Richard called, his voice strained, breaking her horrified trance. Their modified SEM, now little more than a collection of exposed circuit boards and a crudely aimed magnetic lens array, hummed to unstable life, powered by a sputtering portable generator. The effect of the counterpattern broadcast was immediate, and far more dramatic than they could have anticipated. The sphere of distortion contracted violently, as if recoiling from a physical blow, emitting a high-pitched, silent shriek that vibrated in their skulls, at the very edge of human auditory perception and sanity. The floating, distorted objects within it, the pencil, the paperclip, dropped to the table, clattering with a sudden, reassuring normalcy, once again obeying the familiar physical laws of their native universe. For a fleeting, joyous moment, Elena allowed herself to believe they had succeeded. That human ingenuity, however desperate, had triumphed over the alien and the unknown. Then, the shell fragment itself, specimen 137 alpha, began to change. Its physical structure, the dull ochre calcium carbonate, started to flow and morph before their eyes, like liquid stone, yet maintaining its crystalline, faceted properties. New growth, intricate and terrifyingly precise, appeared along its edges, extending the pattern they had identified, but now, it was adapting. The new facets were subtly different, their angles shifting, their symmetries altering, as if it were rewriting its own fundamental geometry to counter their countermeasure. "It's adapting," Richard realized, his voice filled with a new, deeper level of horror. "It's evolving. In real time. In response to our attempt to disrupt it. Elena, it's not just a key or a fossil. It's learning." Before they could even begin to formulate a new approach, before they could process this new, terrifying development, the heavy wooden door at the top of the cellar stairs burst open with a splintering crash. Silhouetted against the dim light of the storm-lashed cabin above stood Dr. William Hayes and Dr. James Foster, their dark suits immaculate despite the chaos, their expressions calm, almost kind. Flanking them, descending the stairs with practiced lethal efficiency, were 4 men in matte black tactical gear, armed with weapons Elena didn't recognize but which pulsed with a faint, contained energy. "Step away from the specimen, Dr. Vassiliev, Professor Blackwood," Hayes ordered, his voice cutting through the thrumming of the adapting artifact, calm and authoritative despite the extraordinary, impossible scene unfolding before him in the cramped cellar. "We're taking control of this situation. Now." Foster descended the stairs slowly, his eyes, unlike Hayes's cool detachment, fixed on the partially contained, still pulsing distortion field with an expression of almost ecstatic, unholy glee. "Remarkable," he breathed, ignoring the two scientists. "Absolutely remarkable. The theoretical applications alone, they're beyond measure." "You don't understand what you're dealing with," Elena warned, her voice cracking with desperation and fury. "This isn't technology you can control or weaponize. This is something far older, far more dangerous, than you can possibly comprehend." "On the contrary, Dr. Vassiliev," Hayes replied, joining Foster at the foot of the stairs, his gaze sweeping over their makeshift lab, the adapting artifact, and the two disheveled scientists with a look that might have been amusement, or perhaps just profound confidence. "We understand perfectly. Your groundbreaking discovery, your unfortunate predicament, merely confirms what certain, shall we say, forward-thinking theoretical physicists from the Ordo Numeri have suspected for decades, that reality is malleable, that the fundamental constants are not truly constant, that geometry itself is a variable. And therefore," Foster added, his eyes glittering with an unsettling, fervent enthusiasm, "all of it can be understood, harnessed, and ultimately manipulated. Imagine the applications, Dr. Vassiliev. Localized regions of the cosmos where different physical laws apply. Chemistry could be rewritten atom by atom. New materials, new states of matter. Or weapons that could unravel the geometric foundation of enemy territory, dissemble entire populations into their constituent quarks," Richard said bitterly, his face a mask of contempt. "Is that your grand, humanitarian plan, Foster?" Hayes ignored the accusation with a dismissive wave of his hand. "Secure the specimen," he instructed the tactical team, his voice hardening. "And all research materials, hard drives, notes, everything." As one of the tactical operators, encumbered by his bulky suit and carrying a specialized, heavily shielded containment case, cautiously approached the workbench where the adapting artifact pulsed with its alien light, specimen 137 alpha pulsed again. This time, the energy discharge was not a generalized wave, but a focused needle-thin beam of pure, geometric distortion. It struck the advancing man directly in the chest. He screamed, a sound that began as human but, midway through, distorted, fractured, and resolved into something utterly abominable, a chorus of impossible harmonics. His body twisted, convulsed, limbs bending at angles that defied anatomy. His armored suit cracking and warping as if it were made of liquid. Dimensions seemed to extend inward from his form rather than outward. Within seconds, he had collapsed, not into a heap, but into a loaf. A grotesque, globular formation of ceramic, metal, and organic matter that resembled a human body only in the most abstract, nightmarish sense, its new facets and planes echoing the terrible geometry of the artifact it had approached. It was still, but a faint, internal light pulsed within its core. The remaining 3 tactical team members retreated hastily, stumbling back up the narrow cellar stairs, their professional composure shattered by a horror that no training could have prepared them for. Foster, however, took an involuntary step forward, his face pale but his eyes wide with manic fascination. Defensive capabilities, and transmutative properties, astounding. Hayes stood his ground, though a muscle twitched in his jaw, his smooth composure finally showing a hairline crack. "Fascinating," he conceded, his voice tight. "It appears to be defensive." "It's not defending itself," Elena said, a terrible, cold certainty filling her, her voice barely a whisper. She looked at the transformed soldier, at the pulsing artifact, at the shimmering air that now seemed to be visibly breathing with an alien rhythm. "It's not attacking. It's communicating. It's demonstrating. It's preaching." The distortion field, which had briefly stabilized after its adaptation, now expanded with explosive speed, instantaneously encompassing half the basement. Within its rapidly growing boundaries, reality fractured along clean, geometric lines, the edges of which glowed with the same impossible, multi-hued light as the artifact. These fractures corresponded exactly, with terrifying precision, to the 137-faced polyhedral structure they had identified. And through these shimmering, newly opened wounds in the fabric of their universe, Elena and Richard glimpsed something else. Another space. Another reality entirely. A realm where light moved in spirals and braids rather than straight lines, where matter existed in states that had no analog, no descriptor, in conventional physics, where colors shifted according to emotional states rather than wavelength. And in that space, something vast, something ancient, something utterly, incomprehensibly other, was moving. It was moving towards them. Towards the tear in its reality that was their universe. The remaining tactical team, urged on by Hayes's shouted commands, returned hesitantly, now wielding even more exotic-looking devices. Emitters that projected crackling fields of blue energy, containment nets that seemed woven from solidified light. They attempted to establish a perimeter around the relentlessly expanding distortion field, their technology sputtering and failing as it encountered the alien physics. Richard pulled Elena aside, his face a deathly white, his eyes burning with a desperate resolve. "We have to destroy it, Elena," he whispered urgently, his voice nearly lost in the cacophony of failing technology, the thrumming of the artifact, and a new sound, a vast, slow, cosmic breathing that seemed to emanate from the rifts. "Whatever's happening here, whatever's coming through, it's beyond our capacity, beyond anyone's capacity, to control or understand." Elena nodded, a profound, soul-deep reluctance warring with the undeniable, horrific truth of his words. Scientific curiosity, the quest for knowledge, had driven her entire life. But what they faced now transcended academic interest, transcended human comprehension. The shell fragment wasn't just a fossil, a key, or even a gateway. It was a symptom, an anchor point, a conduit, an avatar from a reality so profoundly different, so overwhelmingly powerful, that its mere proximity was unraveling our own. "How?" she asked, her voice hoarse. "Conventional forces, explosives, even your exotic tech. They won't affect something that operates under entirely different physical laws, that can rewrite those laws at will." Richard's expression was grim, etched with a terrible understanding. "The fine structure constant. Elena. Alpha. It determines how matter interacts with electromagnetic radiation, how stable atoms are. The artifact, this entity, it can clearly manipulate it locally, but perhaps not on a massive, instantaneous scale across its entire manifested field. If we can force a sufficient, catastrophic shift in that constant throughout this entire space, overload its ability to compensate. A localized but widespread change in fundamental physics," Elena breathed, grasping his desperate, terrifying logic. "You're proposing we detonate a physical constant, tear apart the quantum fabric of this area to seal the rift." It was a gamble of unimaginable proportions, an act of cosmic vandalism with no guarantee of success and potentially cataclysmic consequences even if it did work. But as she looked into the swirling geometric madness of the rifts, at the vast shadowy forms moving within, she knew they had no other choice. Their only hope was to fight fire with a different kind of fire, to fight alien physics with a desperate, suicidal gambit of their own. Hayes and Foster, witnessing their technology failing and their men either transformed or retreating in terror, finally seemed to realize the true scale of the disaster unfolding. "What is that thing?" Foster shrieked, his scientific fascination finally overwhelmed by primal fear as one of the rifts widened, revealing a landscape of impossible, sentient geometries that pulsed with cold, intelligent light. "It's the end of your ambitions, Foster," Richard bit out, already working with Elena to modify their last remaining piece of functional, high-energy equipment, a portable particle beam emitter he had originally intended for isotopic analysis. "And possibly the end of everything else, unless we stop it." They worked in a desperate, silent synchrony, their years of intellectual sparring and collaboration now channeled into this one, final, terrible act. Elena scribbled frantic equations on a grimy piece of concrete wall, calculating the precise energy levels, the exact frequency modulations needed to force the fine structure constant into a state of chaotic, uncontrolled oscillation, to effectively unlatch it from its stable value within the confines of the cellar and, hopefully, within the encroaching alien field. Richard, his hands surprisingly steady, rewired the emitter, bypassing safety protocols, pushing its power core far beyond any designed limit. The artifact, specimen 137 alpha, pulsed faster now, its internal light blazing with an almost unbearable intensity. The rifts had fully opened, the cellar no longer a contained space but a fractured nexus, a crossroads between realities. The air was thick with the scent of ozone, burnt metal, and something else. Something ancient and cold, like the dust between stars. And from the largest rift, a presence began to emerge. Not a creature of flesh and blood, but something far more terrifying. A manifestation of pure, sentient mathematics, a being of living geometry whose form shifted and flowed, resolving into a complex, ever-changing polyhedron of impossible beauty and soul-freezing alienness. Its facets, numbering far more than 137, shone with an internal light that contained all colors and no colors, and as it moved, space itself warped and buckled around it. It was vast, its true scale incomprehensible, only a fraction of its being extending from its distorted reality. Its attention, cold, analytical, and utterly without emotion, focused on the two small, fragile humans and their defiant, pitiful machine. "Now, Elena! Now!" Richard yelled over the rising, deafening chorus of tearing reality. Elena slammed her hand down on the activation sigil she'd hastily scrawled onto the emitter's casing. The particle beam, no longer a tool of precise analysis but a raw, untamed spear of pure energy, erupted from the emitter, not as a focused point, but as a chaotic, wide-spectrum wave. It wasn't aimed at the artifact, or even at the emerging entity. It was aimed at the space between them, at the very fabric of their local reality. For an infinitesimal fraction of a second, there was a profound, absolute silence. All sound, all motion, even the light from the rifts, seemed to freeze, to hang suspended. Then, with a soundless, unimaginable detonation of pure dimensional drift, the fine structure constant in the immediate vicinity was torn from its moorings. The effect was not an explosion of fire and force, but something far more fundamental, far more terrifying. It was an unraveling. The light from the rifts stuttered, fractured, and then screamed, a silent, visual cacophony as the laws governing photons were shredded. The emerging entity recoiled, its geometric form flickering, destabilizing, as the very mathematical language of its existence was corrupted by the sudden violent shift in fundamental universal grammar. The walls of the cellar did not explode. They dissolved, their atomic bonds unraveling as electrons were stripped from their orbits, as protons and neutrons lost their coherence. The air itself became a chaotic soup of ionized particles and radiation. Elena felt a sensation not of burning, but of unbeing. Her body, her thoughts, her very consciousness, were being subjected to impossible stresses, stretched and compressed across dimensions she couldn't name. She saw Richard, his face a rictus of effort and agony, dissolving into a shimmering cloud of incandescent particles, his form no longer bound by the familiar rules of biology or chemistry. She saw Hayes and Foster, their expressions of horror frozen as they too were unmade, their tailored suits and human forms irrelevant anachronisms in a zone where human had lost all meaning. The artifact, specimen 137 alpha, the catalyst for this apocalypse, flared with an impossible, final brilliance, its 137 facets burning like miniature white-hot suns. Then, it too began to dissolve, its alien geometry unable to maintain coherence in the face of such fundamental, violent deconstruction of physical law. The rifts wavered, buckled, and then, with a final silent implosion that tore at the very concept of space, they snapped shut. And then, there was only darkness. A cold, empty, silent darkness. When awareness, or something akin to it, returned to Elena, it was not as a continuity, but as a fresh instantiation. There was no light, no sound, no sensation of a body. There was only thought, pure and disembodied, adrift in a void. Slowly, painstakingly, perception began to coalesce. She was somewhere. Or perhaps somewhen. The concept of distinct space and time felt fluid, unreliable. She was not alone. Faintly, like distant stars resolving in an infinite night, she perceived other points of consciousness. One felt achingly familiar, a resonant echo of shared experience, of terror and discovery. Richard. Another presence, vaster, colder, impossibly ancient, was also there. Not the entity from the rifts, that had been banished, or its connection severed. This was something else. Something native to the altered state they now inhabited. The universe, a concept formed in her disembodied mind, not as a voice, but as a direct impartation of understanding, rebalances. The wound you created, the scar you left on its fabric, is healing. But healing creates new patterns. Elena understood. Their desperate act, their detonation of a fundamental constant, had not just closed a door. It had fundamentally, irrevocably, altered the local structure of reality. They had not destroyed the house to save the city. They had transformed the house into something new, something that no longer belonged to the old neighborhood. You are part of that new pattern now. The understanding continued. You, who touched the raw mathematics of creation, who wielded its grammar as a weapon. You are translated. She felt herself, and Richard, being drawn. Not through space, but along a gradient of complexity, of understanding. They were no longer human, not in any recognizable sense. They were information. Pure information, imprinted onto the newly woven fabric of this altered pocket of the cosmos. They were echoes, residing in the scar tissue of reality, a permanent testament to a brief, violent collision between two universes. They could perceive, they could learn, they could even, in a strange, abstract way, communicate with the silent, overarching consciousness of this reformed space. But they could no longer act upon the physical universe they had left behind. They had become living fossils of a different kind, eternal observers at the edge of a reality they had both saved and shattered. The fear was gone, replaced by a vast, cold, crystalline understanding. They had looked into the abyss, and the abyss had not only looked back, it had integrated them into its own grand, unfeeling design. The shell was gone. The entities were banished. Humanity, unknowingly, had been saved from an extinction event beyond its darkest nightmares. But in a quiet, forgotten corner of Nova Scotia, beneath a patch of earth that would forever radiate faint, inexplicable quantum anomalies, a new kind of existence had begun for two souls who had dared to decipher the fractal whisper of a universe far stranger, and more terrible, than they had ever dreamed. Their science had become their epitaph, and their prison. And the silence of the cosmos settled around them, patient and eternal.